Welcome to the Love Lab Podcast, a safe and fun place to get real and learn about sex. Whether you're a man or woman, single or couple, this is the show for you. I am your host, Kevin Anthony, and I am here to guide you to go from good to amazing in the bedroom and your relationships. All right, welcome back to the Love Lab Podcast. This is episode 335, and it is titled Challenging the Traditional Couples Therapy Model. Now, I don't necessarily have anything wrong with traditional therapy. I mean, there are things that I think it does well and things that I think that it could definitely do better. But one of the reasons I am really interested to have this conversation today, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can see I have a guest who's going to help me discuss this today, is because I am not a therapist. I am a coach, however, and a lot of what I do is similar yet different than what a traditional therapist would do. And one of the reasons why I'm excited to have this conversation is because I know from the years that I've been doing this work how powerful doing something a little different than what alternative therapy does, traditional therapy does. I know how powerful that can be when working with clients. And so I'm really excited to hear somebody who is an actual therapist, who is actually doing something outside of the traditional therapy model, and hear her experience. And, basically what I hope the audience will get out of this is that there are alternatives, that there are different ways to approach the problems that you have, and don't feel like you're forced to do a specific type of thing because, well, that's what your neighbors did, or that's what people tell you you should do. So that's what I'm hoping you'll get out of it. I hope that you'll hear some alternative ideas that may resonate with you. And if you are experiencing challenges in your relationship, you might go, you know what, that sounds like it would really work for me. So that's what we're going to talk about on the show today. Before we do that, a short word from my sponsor, Power and Mastery 3.0. Power and Mastery 3.0 is the latest version of the popular men's sexual mastery course. If you are struggling with erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, or simply want to increase your skills in the bedroom, then Power and Mastery is for you. Join the exclusive club of men who have taken their sexual performance into their own hands and become sexual masters. Mastering your sexuality is a key component to becoming the man she has always dreamt of and craves. Don't leave your sexual performance up to chance or the throw of the dice. Become a sexual master today by going to powerandmastery.com and joining the exclusive club of men who have taken their destiny into their own hands. It's powerandmastery.com. Okay, my guest today, drawing from her stark contrasts of experience from Peace Corps work in Kingston's volatile neighborhoods to 15 years in a maximum security prison, Kendra Capalbo serves as a trusted confidant to Boston's elite, helping wealthy couples strip away their polished veneers to confront raw relationship truths. Her unfiltered, straight-shooting therapy style shatters the gentle conventions of traditional counseling, creating breakthrough moments for clients ready to embrace radical honesty and individual responsibility. Welcome, Kendra, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
All right. So we will get to this later on, but I'm reminded as I read your bio about your 15 years working in a maximum security prison. So we're going to be talking about challenging the traditional therapy model, of course. And a little bit later on in the show, I want to know a little bit about what you learned from that experience and how it impacts your work. So if you're listening and you're curious, like, what would it be like to work in not just a prison, a maximum security prison for 15 years? So yeah, that's going to be, I think, pretty interesting to get into. Before we do that, however, if we're going to be talking about challenging the traditional therapy model, we need to start at least by describing what is the traditional therapy model. So could you take a moment to just kind of describe to the audience, when we say traditional therapy model, what are we talking about?
So for me, when I use that phrase, or I think of that concept, I think of a very kind of a coddling environment, really emphasis on, meeting your client where they are, which I do actually believe in, but also just sort of a slow pace and a very gentle approach. I'm a couples therapist. That's all I do is couples work at this point. But I think it's the same, true for individual and couples work, that it's just a, very evidence-based practice, and kind of trying to, one size fits all, and um this should work, and so trying to get people to kind of go down the path of what the evidence has shown, and I don't think that always works for everyone.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, obviously some of the things you just mentioned, like, it tends to be very slow, it tends to be a little bit coddling, right? Those are things that we definitely think of when we think of the traditional model. But something else that you brought up just now, which was something that I hadn't really thought about, but it's this idea that, like, this is what should work, and kind of trying to force all the clients into that. And I guess I never really thought about it because, the nature of my work as a coach is everything is tailored to the individual or the couple, right?
Hmm.
So this is the number one conversation I have. Like, when I'm on a call with somebody who's interested in potentially working with me, this is the exact conversation we have: is, okay, tell me a little something about who you are, right? And
Yep.
then, they always want to know about what's the program like. And so I'll say, okay, the program is, roughly like this, but this is just a framework.
Right.
This is just like, okay, this is a guideline to follow, but we need to take that framework and we need to make it work for you. And so what I'm hearing you say is that in the traditional therapy model, this is something that they don't do very often, that they kind of tend to have their set sort of way of doing things and they try to force everybody into that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that, people, what my experience has been is that when I'm taught or when I've been trained in a certain modality, they seem very purist. So it's like, well, you should do this. You should work with all of your clients through the lens of the Gottman method, or you should work with all of your clients through the lens of emotionally focused couples therapy, or, whatever insert any kind of modality in there, which is great. But I think that, like, if you're pulling from all of them, and you're sort of mixing and matching, and ebbing and flowing, and a little bit more movement with it, I think it works better. And I think that there's plenty of therapists that are doing that. So I don't want to, like, offend anyone or any therapists out there to be thinking that I'm saying that, all therapists are doing it really, like, strictly like that. But I do think that that's a bit how we're taught, that, you should choose a method, and, like, that's the method that you use, and all clients should, have success with that particular method. And that has not been my experience. And so I tend to mix it up a lot more, and I tend to be a lot more direct, and not coddling, not, overly compassionate, I think, but not overly, I'll call people out on, on their stuff. And I think sometimes that's what, especially the clients that end up resonating with me, that's what they're looking for, is to a little bit more of that coaching, like, kind of energy of, like, being called out, or, if I see that they're making mistakes, it's hard. I'm not going to just passively allow them to do that in their relationship. I'm going to tell them what I'm seeing, and what I think they could be doing better. And sometimes they roll with that, and sometimes they don't. But um, yeah,
Yeah.
not a coddler.
And we'll get more into that in a moment. I want to come back to this idea, though. Like, uh, excuse the crude analogy here. However, I see the different methods, regardless of which one it is, as
Yeah,
simply a tool in the toolbox, right?
right.
And any job that you show up to, anything that needs to be fixed, you bring the whole toolbox, and then you assess what's happening with the problem, and then you figure out what the right tool is for that problem. I mean, that's absolutely what I do as a coach. It sounds like that's what you do, and I agree. There are plenty of therapists who approach it that way, but I think there are also many that it's like they got their form and that's it, and, like, we're going to force it. This is what I'm going to use for everybody, and I
Mm-hmm.
agree that just doesn't work. We need to assess each individual, each couple, for who they are and where they are, right? And then figure out what's the tool that's going to benefit them the most, as
Right.
opposed to, well, this is what I'm trained in, so here's what I'm doing. Um, you kind of started to touch on this already, but my second question is, what are some of the problems or limitations of that model? And so some of which you mentioned already, they go a little too slow, they tend to coddle, they don't ask the tough questions, they don't call people out. Are there any other things that are potential limitations to that traditional model?
I think that sometimes it allows a client to hide. And what I mean by that, and I think that this is in particular true for individual work, which is why I really like working with couples. But if a therapist isn't pushing enough, a client can come in and feel like they're doing the work by just showing up. How was your week? Oh, what did you do this week? Like, and talking sort of in a superficial way about what's going on. And if the client isn't, bringing kind of deeper issues to the therapist, I think a lot of therapists will ride that wave and like just kind of do this like superficial, like friendly, like therapy where they're not really actually getting at any of the issues. Um, and I just think it's, the discomfort that a lot of times therapists will feel with going to the more vulnerable places or pushing a client if they feel like, are they ready or do they want to be pushed? And, that sort of, again, that meeting a client where they are, like sometimes you need to like, from my perspective, it like push them a little bit beyond and then, be able to read the room. And like sometimes you're pushing too hard and you have to back off, but like pushing at least enough that the client is going to places that might be uncomfortable because I think that's often where the work happens.
I completely agree. I think that's where the actual work really happens. And I guess we sort of have to be somewhat careful when we say like, pushing them, right? Because
Yeah.
I don't want people to get the impression that we're like, being harsh in some way. But the reality is like I like to say, you can use the word calling out. In fact, sometimes that's what my clients will say to me. I'll point something out to them, some pattern that they're doing or something, and every once in a while they'll be like, "Oh, you just called me out on that." Right? But so you can use that term because sometimes my clients will say
Yeah.
that too. But the reality is I view it more as just speaking the truth as compassionately as I can, which sometimes the truth, no matter how compassionately you deliver it, is hard, right? Because we don't necessarily want to accept that that's the pattern that we're doing, or that we are actually responsible for that thing that happened, or whatever it is. And so I think that ability to be able to come out somewhat directly and just say, hey, you're telling me X, Y, and Z, but what I really hear or what I see
Uh,
is, something else, right? And just being able to state that. And I think I will say I have not been personally in a traditional therapy model, but I know plenty of people who have. And I had an ex-partner who spent many years in a traditional therapy model. And one of the things that I saw through that was that the therapist never called her out on her stuff. And the approach seemed to be more like, we're just going to keep talking about it until eventually you come to the realization yourself that you
mhm.
have these things. And that can work. There is power in that because when somebody finally comes to the realization themselves, it tends to stick. But at what cost? I mean, a decade of therapy she went through, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also, like worth mentioning that the approach fits a certain personality and it doesn't fit another personality, right? So when I do a consultation with a client, like I will often say like my approach is not the best approach for everyone and I am going to be the type of therapist that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way and that's fine and I don't take offense to that. It feels like a good fit for certain people. It doesn't feel like a good fit for other people. And I think some people do prefer that, like just having someone they could talk to that supports kind of every decision they make and is very gently maybe pushing back without being too assertive about it or without, kind of holding the mirror up too close. And that's maybe what they need. I'm just not the therapist that's great at that.
Well, Kendra, I'm with you because I'm
Right.
I'm not that person either. If I see you doing a pattern, I'm going to call it out on you. But I feel like that's honestly my responsibility as your coach. Like if I'm not telling you that, like if I'm seeing a pattern that is harming you, your partner, your relationship, And I'm not telling you that that exists. I feel like that's neglect on my part, right?
That's how I feel.
Yeah, but I get not everybody necessarily feels that way. But I can be a very direct person. So yeah, I think our ways of doing things are very similar, and that probably does appeal to a certain type of client. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I just want somebody to hold my hand for the next 15 years, we're probably not the right therapists and coaches for you.
Exactly.
So I'm curious. This is actually kind of a good segue because you're kind of talking about how you do things versus how they do things. And my next question was literally, what is different about the way that you approach couples therapy versus this more traditional model that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my goal is to get you out of therapy, right? So I don't want to do I do it sometimes? Yes, but like my goal is not to do like long, like year-long therapy with people. My goal is to get you out of therapy and give you the skills that you need to be able to have the conversations you need to have no matter what comes up in your future without the need of a therapist. My door is always open, but I'm hoping I don't hear from people again after they like graduate or whatever word you want to use. But I do that, I think, through that, really just being, I use the term calling people out because I think that that is also a term I hear from clients in a similar way to what you're saying. And usually with, tone and inflection that expresses appreciation for it. Like, yeah, like I needed to be called out on that. Like, where people are trying to almost fool themselves. And I think that happens a lot in the relationships where, people don't want to own their own part of things. They just want to point at their partner. So the partner's the problem, the partner's the problem, the partner's the problem. And I think a lot of times they come to couples therapy thinking that a therapist is going to just side with them all the time. And I don't believe that that's effective. I think it's important to like really look at what's happening with both partners. What's the responsibility they each bring to the relationship? And sometimes their partner doesn't have the ability to uh, call them out. Again, I'll just use that phrase again, but he doesn't know how to say, this is what you're doing that's hurting me. And I'm comfortable to come in and say, this is what I'm hearing with the words that are being spoken. This is how I think your partner's being impacted. And sometimes those things are really hard to hear. But I think it's critical if you're going to make progress. Skirting around the issue for, like you said, 10 years doesn't get you anywhere. It just gets you in a circle. And I say all the time to clients that like the hardest way is often through, but it's also the fastest way. And if you can just kind of like bear with the difficulty of the through process, like you will get there. You will get where you're trying to get. But if you go around it, if you're avoiding it, like there's no end to that circle. It just continues.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have the same philosophy as you as far as my goal is to get as much change for my client as quickly as possible.
Mm,
Which I think, I really wish more of the world had this sort of viewpoint,
mm.
right? Like, I wish the medical industry had this viewpoint, which is the goal is to get you well as quickly as possible and get you out of my practice, right? Like, that's what the goal should be. And I'm glad to hear you share that, that's your goal too. Like, your goal is to help these people as quickly as you can so that they don't need you anymore. And as you said, the door's always open. If they need anything, they
Right,
know they can always come back, but they shouldn't need anything, right? And if
right.
they do, that's fine. But hopefully you've done a good enough job that they've moved past that. And maybe something new might come up or whatever. But this idea that, yeah, you want to help them, you want to empower them, you want to give them the tools, and you want them to move on and get past this challenging, time of their lives or relationship as quickly as they can. And that's one of the challenges or problems that I've often seen with traditional therapies. I don't feel like they have the same motivation.
Well, if you think about this is probably another thing that I should have mentioned earlier, but if you think about traditional therapy, it's very reactive. So you go to therapy when you're broken. You go to therapy when your relationship's like in crisis. And I'm trying to move towards a little bit more of like a proactive approach of getting people to start to recognize like what are the things you should be doing to like make sure that you have a healthy relationship before you have an unhealthy relationship. And I think that the focus of in the medical field, it's the same way. It's like, the insurance companies don't want to pay for anything that might like help you avoid getting sick. They just want to wait till you're sick, make you jump through 8 million hoops and then like try to fix it. And I think therapy is often that way. It's like once you identify the problem is when you go to therapy, instead of, I think, where people are more apt to go to coaching because they recognize they want to get somewhere different from where they are. They want to avoid going down a negative path. So it overall strikes me as a more proactive approach coaching is than therapy. And I think that that's how people think of it. Like, it's few and far between that I get couples that are saying, we are great. We are in a really good spot. And we just want to meet with you to make sure that we don't like, fall off this like great trail we're on, or we want to meet with you to make sure that we like know what, things to look out for, what to avoid to make sure that we, maintain a healthy relationship. They wait till they're already in like, a place of crisis usually. And then they reach out and say, help us fix it. Um, so switching that around, I think would be a lot more beneficial for a lot of people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I if I had to guess, I'd say the majority of people that come to me do come to me because they're already in a problem. However, one of the things I do appreciate is I do get clients who come to me saying, we're doing okay. It's not really a problem now, but either I could see it becoming a problem and I want to take care of it before it becomes a
Mhm.
problem. Or it's maybe just in the beginning and we just want to we want to fix this right now
Mhm.
before it turns into something big. So I do get some of those and I really appreciate those clients as well. Just because I agree. Like, I love the idea that when a client comes to you and is like, here's what I see, and I want to be proactive about it versus, I waited until the very last minute and we're in complete crisis and chaos and breakdown now and please fix us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I work with either one, but I
Mhm.
definitely appreciate when people are proactive for sure.
Yeah.
I was wondering, so my approach to this being, that's like I'm a man, obviously. I've spent a lot of my life doing extreme sports, and so like that's just sort of my personality. So being direct like that is just sort of who I am. It's not something I've even really practiced or tried to do. I'm curious though if your experience working in a maximum security prison for 15 years has influenced you. Like, has that impacted you in a way that has made you more direct, and if so, how?
1,000%. And the how is that I saw it, it was more effective, right? Like I would see, and I'm not, look, I'm not naive. So I'm not saying I was never like played, or bamboozled into thinking that I was like helping someone, but you know, I just countless stories of times where I think, other therapists in the system were, sort of like taking this sort of like other approach that's a little more coddling and like, oh, they're doing so well. And I'm like, you are blind to see like the reality of what's in front of you. And that like there's a particular example that stands out. And I kind of called the kid aside and said like when you want to hear the real deal, put a slip in to see me, which is how they would ask to be seen. And he put a slip in and I was like, nothing's gonna change until something changes. And I was just super direct with him. And I think that, I was the first person that he had any respect for because I didn't, I saw through like the lies he was trying to tell himself or anyone else. And got down to like the grit of it. And I think he appreciated that. And then I just started seeing that worked. And again, like I probably sound like I'm a jerk. I'm not a jerk in my directness. I'm just direct. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like I'm not mean, I'm not cruel, but I'm just direct. And I think I do it in a compassionate way that clients appreciate. Um, but yeah, it was just a far more effective strategy in that environment than the otherwise I would have just they would have walked all over me, I think, with
Yeah.
the other approach, the traditional approach.
Do you think that you felt more comfortable trying that approach there because you sort of had a captive audience? I mean, Pun intended, slightly.
Yeah, only slightly, right? Um, yes and no. In some ways it's a less captive audience because most times they don't want to be doing therapy. Like the example that I just referenced, it was actually like a murderers group, and you have to do that group in order to get parole. So, that like thing, sort of the incident that went down where, sort of where the other therapists kind of had their approach with him in the group. And then I called him sort of aside after the group and told him to put a slip in. Like he didn't want to be in that group. Like he wasn't in that group. He was in that group because he had to be. And so captive in the sense that they're forced, but like in terms of like engagement, far less captive.
Yeah.
Um,
I was just curious because I wonder sometimes, and I know this is just part of an approach that a lot of therapists have been taught, but I was just kind of wondering if maybe some therapists sometimes are afraid to be so direct and real with their clients for fear that their client's just gonna not come back and be like, I don't like this person, I don't want to work with them, and so maybe they take a softer approach. Whereas, working in a prison system, it's like they don't have to put a slip in, as you said, but they're not going anywhere necessarily, right? Like, and you've got an endless supply of people to work with, so job security isn't really necessarily an issue. It was just a thought I had. I was curious your
yeah.
take on it.
No, I think that look, I've had those instances where I've said something and the client has not come back. So there is that risk, and I'm sure, people feel it, and there are times when I might sense that a client can't handle it in the moment and I might not push, but it's coming more from a place of I don't want to lose them because I could see there's work to be done, and that they'll be ready soon versus like I won't push because I just need the client. Like I think I try to make a very like conscientious effort of like if I'm choosing not to go in that direction and kind of call someone out, why am I not? And it's never because I'm afraid that they won't come back, because I'll do that in those instances anyway. And I've had it work in both directions where they've not come back and where they have. So,
Mhm. Well, I certainly hope if there are any therapists listening to this, and I actually do have therapists who listen to my
I'm
show, which
sure.
I always feel complimented by, since they're the credentialed professionals. And always, I'm like, oh, thanks for listening. I'm glad you appreciate the content. But I would hope that any therapists that are listening, that you're not holding back for that fear. I would hope that you would be, real, genuine, honest, saying what needs to be said, because that's what's in the best interest of the client. So hopefully that's the route that they're taking. Um, I do want to pause for a short break. And when I come back, I want to talk about, I have a question here about some of the other lessons that you've learned, since we're talking about, the influence that working in the prison had on your style and the way that you do your work. So I had a question about some of the other things that you learned there. So I want to get into that. And then there are some things also, because, you do specifically couples therapy. And so I had some questions revolving around couples therapy and some of the common reasons why somebody might come to you, like, infidelity and stuff like that I want to get into, because in the pre-interview we talked a little bit about it, and you had some really cool stuff to share about that. So that's what I want to do on the other side of the break. But before that, are you a couple? Are your relationship and sex life where you want them to be? Are there changes you would like to make but just don't know how? Maybe you think there is nothing that can be done. If you are not 100% happy with where your relationship or sex life is, then get help today and change your life. Go to kevinanthonycoaching.com/couples and schedule a strategy call with me today so we can map out a strategy to get you where you want to be so you can have it all your way. Go to kevinanthonycoaching.com/couples and book your strategy call today. I will also say too, and I will give Kendra a moment at the end of the show to, say where you can find her and where you can hire her. I say this all the time. when I have other people on the show. If what you're hearing from Kendra resonates with you and you like her and her personality or how she does things, I highly encourage you to reach out to her. Yes, I'm reading an ad for my own coaching program, but I want people to work with the coach, therapist, whatever that works for them. Because if you choose somebody that doesn't work for you, you're not likely to get the change that you want. And what I want, and I'm sure what Kendra wants, is for you to get the change that you want. So if you like my work and you listen to my show and you need some help, that's how you can find me if you're a couple. And at the end, I will give Kendra an opportunity to tell you where you can find her. All right, let's get back into the questions. So, my question was, you worked for 15 years in a maximum security prison, and we haven't really talked about it. You kind of alluded to it a little bit, but I know some of the types of people that you worked with in that environment. And I know that there were things that you learned from that experience that you take into your work today. And I'm wondering if maybe you could share a few of those.
I think one of the most maybe interesting ones is just how similar we all are. I think that people see, someone who's been incarcerated or know of someone that is incarcerated, and there's just kind of these automatic like views of them. And at the end of the day, they're just people, and often just made a mistake. And some of the things that some of the things the things I learned from them, really, I would say, just about gratitude and sort of being appreciative for the things that you do have. I mean, there's nothing like having a circumstance in life where you've made a decision that has taken everything away from you, and now you're sort of in this like very vulnerable place. But I remember one client in a group I ran, saying that he was grateful to be in prison, and he was doing life. And I was really shocked by the comment. And when I asked him about it, like what he meant, he was saying that he felt like he would never have appreciated his or never would have had the relationship he had with his son if he hadn't been incarcerated. The lifestyle he was living, all of that. And the irony is now I work with like very, wealthy, successful couples, and I think the same is true for them. Like they're at this place where they're starting to see that, they the where the emphasis has been on in their lives, they've missed the what might be the most important elements, which is either their relationship or their families, because their focus has been so like far in another direction. And it's taken this a lot of times, like I said, that crisis point of like this rock bottom in the relationship for them to really step back and say, like, what is important to me and what do I want to put my effort into, and what changes do I potentially need to make in my life in order to be able to do that. And so it's this real like strange irony of like obviously the difference of like what the distraction has been, or what the catalyst to the change has been is greatly different, but I think the lessons a lot of times are the same. um and then I think that there are some personality types that are actually similarities in personality type, quite honestly. I always worked really well with the clients of the prison, the inmates of the prison that other people didn't want to work with, right? And I think that that was due to my approach, and the fact that I would kind of call them out, and I wasn't afraid of them, and I was pretty direct with them. And it's sort of the same with the clients I work with now. I think that they're used to everyone saying yes to them, and everyone telling them that they're doing great at everything because they're these high-powered people. And then to have a therapist who's like, are you like, is it all going great? Like, what else could you be doing? Or, that's great. You can buy all these fancy things, but like, when's the last time you like tucked your kid into bed? And like, where is your priority? And sort of bring these things to them, to their attention in a way that really makes them pause and think about it. I think maybe I wouldn't have the comfort level to do that had I not been in the prison system and gotten really used to and comfortable kind of working with people in that manner.
Yeah, yeah. I would imagine that having worked in that environment definitely made you more confident to be able to tell people the things that they really need to hear.
Yeah.
Um, Oh, if we talked in the pre-interview also about one of the things that you learned from your time in prison. Not you in prison. If anybody's tuning in the middle,
Felt like
she
I
wasn't in
was.
prison. She worked in a prison. um, but one of the things that we talked about in the pre-interview that you learned there was this idea of taking responsibility for your actions. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how it applies actually to relationships.
Yeah, so in that environment, what I saw was the people that the individuals that were able to really reflect and look at the decisions that they had made and take 100% responsibility and not have it be about like the cops were after me or this, correctional officer has it in for me or like whatever the case may be, whatever, like I had a bad childhood. I grew up poor, like whatever the circumstances were, which might have actually been accurate circumstances. I'm not discounting the circumstances, but having an attitude of like, okay, that's what it was, but I still made choices and my choices are why I'm here is empowering in the sense that it gives them the ability to make different choices. And you could almost see that like light go on, like for those inmates who had that like realization of like, I put myself here. And instead of that being like a depressing thought, it's actually the most like inspirational thought because it means that I can make different choices, have different outcomes when I get out. And I think the same is true in relationships. The couples that I see make the most progress are the couples where both partners are willing to go, what am I doing and what's my role in this relationship? I always kind of use the line like we make change or influence change in our relationship through our own selves and our own actions. And as long as you're pointing your finger at your partner, no change will come. But if you can look at yourself and say, like, what is my role in this? Even if it's just a small role that you could find today, like, what is my role in this? Then you could start to influence change. Um, and I obviously want to like exclude like domestic violence situations or anything like that. Like abusive relationships like would be in a different category. And I want to make sure that I'm clear on that. But you're just kind of like run of the mill, like relationship, marital problems or relationship problems. Like I promise there's always somewhere. If you look deep enough and you're honest enough with yourself, like what are you bringing to the table that's maybe not the right energy for what you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I will say that the overwhelming majority of couples that come to me to work on their relationship or their sex life, it's generally one of the two that has driven them to show up here because they felt like there's something wrong here. And not in every case, but in many of the cases, that particular individual feels like it's the other person who's not stepping up, who's not doing the work, or who has the bad behavior, or whatever it is. And in pretty much every case, we can we can see, and we do a little work, we kind of dig under the surface a little bit, and we can see where both people have their role in it. But of course, right, like I mean, this is just like sort of common sense in the sense that a relationship is created by two people, right? And so we're each bringing our stuff to it. I just finished working with a couple very recently. It was a very similar situation to that, where it was the wife who was really driving them to get help, right?
Mhm.
And when they show up and it's like he's not doing this, he's not doing this, he's not doing this, and a lot of that. And as I start to work with them both, I clearly see all the things that she's complaining about, and she's not wrong.
Right.
But I also can see all of the things that she's doing that are exacerbating this dynamic between the two of them. And so fortunately she was very open-minded to that, and I was able to point out to her the patterns that she was doing. But I also took some time to sort of show them how each other's patterns were influencing each other's patterns.
Mhm.
In other words, there were patterns that she was doing that she wasn't necessarily aware of, that were in response to the patterns that he was doing. right?
Right.
And so if we can shift his pattern, bring awareness to her pattern and help her shift that, like rather than just trying to shift him and hoping that her pattern sorts itself out, right? we get to shift his pattern and also shed light on her pattern so she can work on that, and then together we can make much faster progress rather than just solve that and hope the rest all works itself out.
Right. Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, that is one, like kind of what you're talking about, that or like kind of relationship dynamic that, is like a concept that I very much pull from like emotionally focused couples therapy and sort of these cycles that exist in our relationships and how like, the more you do the one thing, the more the other person does that other thing that you don't like, which then makes you do your thing and they do their thing and all that. But yeah, I think that when you have two people who are both willing with a little encouragement to say like, what's my side of that cycle, that's when you're going to really see change versus, all through the other person. I've never seen that work. I've never seen it where it's the case, and I've never seen it an effective way of like kind of dealing with it to just focus on like the one person and not go like, well, what's going on with the dynamic. And then I think the other thing is that we get into these like patterns that we then start to anticipate are going to happen. So we're like, anticipatory like anxiety that there's going to be this thing that my partner is going to be mad. My husband's going to be mad when he comes home from work, and now I'm on the defense before he's even walked in the door. And then sure enough, he walks through the door and he's in a bad mood. But is he really, or is he like responding to that energy that he's meeting when I'm like, have my like war clothes on because I'm ready for like, to go to battle with him. So these ways we expect our partner to behave, how they've behaved, is also like one of the challenging things I think with this type of work is getting people to relax into it, to allow themselves to even be able to see the change as it starts to happen. Sometimes they like have those blinders on. They can't see it. It's happening. I'm seeing it and they can't see it yet, because they're so in their old patterns. But I'm sure you see the same thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I try to do when working is I always, and it has to be genuine. If they're not happening, then I just kind of skip this part. But in my sessions, when we do come to those, light bulb moments, those ahas, those moments where change is actually happening, I always set aside some time to do what I call celebrations with them. It's like, let's celebrate the progress that we've made, because you're absolutely right. We are seeing the progress, right? But a lot of times they're not seeing it because they're still in their pattern. They're still working hard. They're on the wagon and then they fall off the wagon, right? And so it's harder for them to see it because they're in it. And so I think one of the things that I've always tried to do is just to point it out to them so
Yeah,
that they can see it. Because if they can see that they're actually making progress, my experience has been that it motivates them to do more,
of course. Yeah. That momentum. Yeah.
as opposed to feeling like we're just keep going through it and it doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. Maybe I shouldn't have even done this whole process. And it's like, no, 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 don't quit now, you're just making progress. Like, so I
Yeah.
like to highlight those things with my clients and do little
Yeah. Absolutely.
celebrations and be like, look at where you're at now compared to where you were when you
Yes.
started, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's always fun. This is actually a great time to talk about this also, because, when I do the pre-interviews, which, I talk about,
Mhm.
the listeners always know that I talk to the guests beforehand, because I like to get to know you and get a feel for you and all that kind of stuff. And I write a bunch of notes on that. So obviously we talked about some of the lessons that you learned in the prison, and I wrote down a few of the things that you had shared in that moment. One of which I think is really appropriate to what we were just talking about, which is this idea of gratitude. Now, you shared a little bit about that with the story you shared about the one inmate who was like, if I hadn't been incarcerated, I never would have had the relationship with my son. But I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about the impact or the importance of gratitude when it comes to relationships and, doing the work and dealing with the difficult things that
Yeah.
come up.
Sure. It's funny because I feel like I'm like this like two sides of this like very opposite coin, right? Like so I'm in one way I'm like I like to call people out and that's my style, and then this other way I'm a little woo-woo and like But I think that gratitude in relationships can be like one of the biggest like moving forward type momentum type things. Like, when you are only focused on the things that are not working in your relationship, you're going to get more things that are not working. When that's what you're looking for, you will find it. And I think that's true of any relationship, even a great relationship. If you choose to look at the things that are negative, you're going to find them. And if you stop and you actually very consciously try to make an effort to focus on the parts of the relationship and the parts of your partner that you actually are grateful for and you appreciate and you love, and like you put your kind of you spend time like very consciously putting your mind there, then you start to see more of that. So there's like homework assignments I give clients like in session to like really highlight that idea very early on in the process, because it's just your wherever your attention goes is like gonna influence like your overall mood, and you can shift that just slightly by very consciously working on that. I do that as a practice every morning. Even the days when I'm not a fan of my husband's, and there's many of those days, like I force myself. I'm like, I know there's a reason I'm with this man. Like, what are the things I'm like appreciative for? And even when I'm like sort of grasping, like I notice how I feel different at the end of the practice than I do at the beginning of the practice. And it's even when they're, really small things. Like I'm glad he, you know, didn't throw socks on the floor this morning or something silly like that. It's like just finding something and highlighting it and putting my attention there versus, on the things that I might not be happy about.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's hugely important to at least take moments to reflect and feel the gratitude for the things that you do love and appreciate about the person. Of course, one of the things that I teach couples, and I'm sure you teach them some other similar practice, but you just call it the appreciation game, where you make it a regular practice to share some of those things,
Yep.
you know, just on a regular basis. And of course, I teach this to a lot of people, and most of the time, people are very open to the idea, but every once in a while, you get a little pushback from it. Like, well, she knows that. I've told her that
Mm.
before, or he knows that. And I'm like, nope, nope, nope. It doesn't
Yes.
work like that.
Oh,
You may have told her once. You probably thought it was last week, but it was probably 6 months ago, right? And it's not that she doesn't remember it, but it's just like, and this is true for men too. We like to hear it
mhm.
on a regular basis. It helps us remember. We start to feel, maybe like from a man's point of view, like one of the things that we love to hear is appreciation for the ways that we do show up, right? The things
Mhm.
that we take care of, and maybe the gross things that we take care of, or the things that we fix, or things that you don't want to do. We like to hear that you appreciate when we do that. And so if we're doing those things all the time, all the time, all the time, and we never hear like, thank you, I really appreciate that, I'm so glad I didn't have to do that, or I love it when you take care of those things, like resentment builds up, right? And it's the same way, women, when they're doing all the things that they do and we're not speaking up and appreciating it as a man. Which I will say that, if I had to say in generalities, women are generally a little bit better at sharing the appreciations. It's a little more
Mhm.
challenging in general for us as men. So it's a big thing I work on with men, is like, it's not that we don't think these things as men. They just don't always come out the mouth, right? So it's like teaching men to actually verbalize these things when they pop into your mind, because we do this all the time. Like, our partners will come down like wearing a certain outfit, and we'll glance over, and we'll have the thought like, oh, she looks good in that, or oh, her butt looks good in that. And then all of a sudden we're on to something else, and those words never actually came out. And so now she thinks you didn't even notice, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So anyway, that's a little bit of an aside, but the idea of sharing the gratitudes, and,
Yeah.
and focusing on the gratitudes as well. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, but I really wanted to touch on this a little bit. Something else that we talked about in the pre-interview, and I sort of teased a little bit before the mid-roll break there. Um, but a common problem that couples have, that they will often come to therapy for, is infidelity. One of the
Mhm.
things that you and I talked about in the pre-interview call was what we were calling the sort of false beliefs when it comes to infidelity. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what some of those false beliefs around infidelity are.
Yes, so these are obviously all just my own like observations through my own practice. So this is not, I will not say this is scientific. I'm sure someone will find something written somewhere that disagrees with this. But I think that part of the problem is that there are all these things that disagree with what I'm about to say. But I think that there is actually some truth to it. I think that we have this like idea that it's men who cheat and men cheat more and men are just like programmed to cheat. And I just don't think that that's true. I think that women cheat just as much probably as men cheat. But I do think that where there often is a difference is in what happens when the cheating occurs. So I think that there is a little bit more of an acceptability for women to work on the relationship after a man's been like cheated on her than a man is. So if there's infidelity and it's the woman that cheated, I think more often than not, the marriage ends, the relationship ends, or they just don't talk about it. Maybe they keep going, but they don't discuss it. So I think what we end up seeing in therapy offices, and maybe you could speak to whether it's the same in coaching, but we see more often men who've cheated, but I don't think it's representative of what's actually happening in the world. I think it's just representative of what's happening in terms of who's coming to seek help after it. Um, I think that there is um, I think women are just sort of like programmed that we're supposed to forgive more. And men are sort of like it's an ego, like you're not supposed to, I don't know, we don't have as many references of that, like where like it's okay to work on the relationship. And I've seen people do amazing work after infidelity. I've seen people come back from it and be in a great place and really like do the work that they needed to do and get to the end of it. But I think that it's just there's so much shame around it, even more so I think for men that they don't seek that help. I've only worked with a handful of couples, and that's really primarily the clientele that I end up getting are infidelity cases. It's only been a handful where it's been that the woman was the one that cheated, and I think it's a disservice that no one's really talking about what's actually happening, because I think men feel like they have no option other than to just end the relationship.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I did a whole episode on cheating, and for that episode, I did a bunch of research because I wanted to know the answer to some of those questions
Yeah.
too. And I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. And it wasn't 50-50, but it wasn't that far off, honestly, from what I recall. I think it was a slightly higher percentage of men that cheated than women, but people tend to think that it's primarily men. They would say, oh, it's probably 70% men, 30% women. It was actually closer to like 45% women, 55% men. It was somewhere around there. I don't remember
Yeah.
exactly, but for all intents and purposes, is this relatively equal with the number of men and women that cheat. And I think you're probably right as well with the idea of who ends up seeking the help for it. And I agree that I think, from the man's point of view, when a woman cheats, I think, yeah, it is ego confronting. I think that, yeah, there's something in his psyche that's like somehow he wasn't man enough,
Mhm.
right, to prevent that from happening or to, whatever. That this probably leads them to, like you said, either just end the relationship or basically hide it, right? Out of, shame of,
Yeah.
this actually happened to me. And so, yeah, there probably is something to that. I don't know research on that particular subject at all, but I would say you're probably correct about that, regardless of what
Yeah.
research might exist out there.
I think that research, I'm glad to hear that it's maybe aligning more. I know that at least in the past, the research did say that it was more men. And I think that that also, um, I think that interestingly, like, I think women, it is harder for women to admit to themselves because I do think that there's like a like society's view on women who cheat is much more dire than men who cheat. Like there is some level of like unspoken understanding, or whether it meets the research or not, that like that's just what men do. And when a woman does it, I think that, similar to like she's a slut if she has sex with more than like one man in her life, and a guy, the same notions aren't thought of for men as much. Like that exists in that world too. So when you have a lot of the research and it's self-report, I think that a lot of times women are not reporting that they've been with someone when they've been in a monogamous relationship, when they have, or that it's an emotional affair that they're able to rationalize, like, oh, it's just a friend and it's nothing. And if they're honest, like that's probably breaking some of the boundaries within the relationship. Um, but yeah, I think, the more people talk about it, the more people are able to actually like be honest with themselves and maybe avoid it altogether by just being able to speak about it more freely in their relationship when they're having those sorts of thoughts or urges or thinking about it, or crossing some of those really like beige lines, before they've like crossed anything like more substantial. Um,
Yeah, for
more-
sure. That's one of the keys, and that actually brings me up to another aspect of this part of the conversation that I wanted to talk about, which is this idea that if somebody cheats, all the blame is on them, right? Which I just want to make one point, and then I'll let you go on this one because I know you're going to have a bunch to share on this. But the reality is this: if the relationship, which is created by two people, was a highly functioning, healthy relationship, the other person wouldn't feel the need to cheat, right? And so you always got to look at the dynamic that's going on with both. But I really want to hear your take on this.
No, I'm actually like I love this topic. I could talk about this topic for hours because like when I'm meeting with a couple, that's I want to hear some level of that in the consultation, or I might not work with them. Kind of selective in who I work with these days. And if they come in and it's all finger pointing, like, and there's no like, well, there were some fractures in the relationship, like then I'm hesitant, because I always think that that's the case, unless it's a characterological cheater. I think that there are some people who just do not subscribe to the idea of monogamy within the context of a monogamous relationship. So I'm not talking about people that are like polyamorous. I'm talking about people that are like in a monogamous relationship, claiming to be in a monogamous relationship, but don't actually believe that they need to do that. And there's a pattern, and they've cheated in all relationships, and they cheat multiple times. And that's different. But most of the clients that I see, the way that I describe it is it's like two people walk to the door and then one person walks through the door. So the act of the infidelity is the responsibility of the person who walks through the door. 100%. I'm not going to like take that away from that. So it's not about blame, but I think that you have to be able to look at like what were the fractures in the relationship that led to the door being cracked open in the first place. And I think that too often, there is just this like, oh, it's just they're just a bad person, or they're just like once a cheater, always a cheater, and all these kind of things that we hear all the time. And I don't subscribe to it, which is very, very different than it's not how I felt at the beginning. Like when I first started doing this work, I would have said all those same things, but working with people that I really do like admire as really good people and hearing their stories, countless stories, I just see that it's not the case, and that it really is more often, a fractured relationship that's not being worked on, that's not being communicated about, and then someone makes the poor decision to act on that. Which again, 100% responsibility for that action of cheating with the one person, but the health of the relationship falls on both people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know that I've ever really seen an instance where there wasn't something else going on, within the relationship. And yeah, we're going to put the outliers on the side, right? Because there are some people that just, can't be faithful for whatever reason, but they're outliers. In general, though, there's always a dynamic that's going on that led to it. And you're right, the person who actually did the cheating, they're the ones that stepped through the door, so they bear responsibility for that. But what was happening within the context of
Right.
the relationship? And one of the things that you'll see a lot of the times is one person or the other will say, well, but I didn't do anything wrong. Like I didn't do anything to deserve this. Like I was just, being, in this relationship and, doing what I thought was whatever. And it's like, okay, you may not necessarily have done anything wrong, but there's a whole bunch of right things that you could have and should have been doing that you weren't doing. So, like, what I see a lot in that context would be, we talked about the appreciation game before, just like never appreciating your partner,
Mm.
right? It could be, well, I show up, I go to work every day, I provide for the family, I do all the things I'm expected to do. Okay, but are you nurturing the relationship?
Mm.
Are you loving her? Do you give her the attention that she needs? Do you give her, the physical attention that she needs? Like, so a lot of times it's like, no, you didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but you also weren't doing all the things right that
Mhm.
you need to do to nurture a healthy, loving, successful relationship. And I think that's the part for the person who got cheated on that's sometimes hard to accept,
Mm.
because they're like, but I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't cheat. I wasn't talking to another woman. I go to work every day. I provide for the family. I do this, this, this. It's like, yeah, but you missed all that other stuff. It
Mhm.
doesn't take away from the responsibility of the person who cheated, but you have to be able to see how it contributed to the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. I think for it to be able to heal and to have it not happen again. If you don't know what's broken, how do you fix it? You have to be able to understand like what was broken. But yeah, I think it's hard for people. I think that they get caught in that, the idea of blame and they hear it no matter how you say it and how many different ways, you try to say it or I try to say it. And, there's still this like where they might be hearing in what's being said, like, I'm to blame for this. And that's like, take blame off the table. It's not about blame. It's just about the relationship dynamic was the problem. And the relationship dynamic was not where it needed to be, probably in both directions to a certain extent. And it wasn't being addressed and it wasn't being cared for and it wasn't being like fixed. And this is kind of the outcome of it. But yeah, those are tough conversations. But gosh, when you get a couple that's willing to have them and really willing to like, do that hard work of being honest that where they maybe were falling a little bit short or not doing as much as they could have, like their responsibility in it, that's when you get, such amazing results in this kind of work. And that's what I love.
Yeah, those are the successful ones that rebound from it. The
Yep.
ones that can recognize how both people had a role in it and both are willing to shift. Those are the ones that recover.
And not only recover, like actually get to a place that was even better than where they were before, because now they're actually being honest with like what the issues maybe were and where they weren't meeting each other's needs. And so they can like fix all of that. So I mean, I have a lot of times where couples will say that on some, do they wish it happened? Like, no, they wish they could go back in time and have it like have figured it out a different way. But that the silver lining of it all is that they like are able to have like a fulfilling relationship that they might not have ever reached without the infidelity having happened. So, um, yeah, those are the great clients. I love working with. Are
Kind
able to
of,
look from that perspective.
yeah, kind of like the inmate who said he never would have
Yeah,
had that relationship with his son without that.
right. Yeah,
We all we all hope, myself included, that we can learn the lessons of life the easy way, but sometimes
I know.
we got to learn them the hard way. But
Yeah,
that's why there are people like myself and like you to help people when they are learning the hard way navigate it and get through it. So please share with people how they can find you if they need help navigating these types of challenges.
sure. So the easiest way is through my website, quite honestly. I am as a therapist licensed only in 4 states. So I'm able to work with couples in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Connecticut, in terms of therapy. And my website is www.conciergecoupleskounseling.com. And then I sort of alluded to it earlier. I am in the process of launching something I'm really excited about. It's a couples retreats, and it's very much in the spirit of proactive versus reactive. So, opportunity to kind of come with your partner, bespoke ones, and we'll be having group ones as well, where, I try to teach you all the things that you can look out for so that you don't fall in the traps that a lot of couples fall into. And that the best way to find me is through Exclusiva Couples Retreats on Instagram. And if you shoot me, a DM on there, I'd love to set up a call with you and we could talk about maybe creating a retreat for either just you and your partner or signing up for one of my group retreats.
Awesome. And those links will be in the description, so you can find them there. Well, Kendra, I would like to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and experience, because you obviously have a lot of experience and also some unique experience that not very many other people have. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing that.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
All right, everybody, that's all the time I have for this episode, and I will see you next week. I hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoyed this show, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. And for more free exclusive content, join me in the Passion Vault at kevinandceline.com/vault. That's kevinandceline.com/vault. Thanks for listening, and remember, as Celine used to say, you're amazing.